The heavy silence was deafening as I stared at my plate of untouched food. My parents sat across from me, their cold eyes boring into me with disappointment and disgust. I could feel the tension radiating off them like heat waves. "Well?" My father's gruff voice finally broke the silence, shattering the fragile peace. "What do you have to say for yourself?" I swallowed hard, my mouth bone dry. What could I possibly say that would appease these materialistic monsters who just didn't understand me? Who valued inflated egos and societal status over real human connection? I won't apologize for standing up for what I believe in," I managed, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "This environmental club means everything to me. It's my passion and my purpose." My mother's perfectly made-up face contorted into a sneer. "Purpose? Your only purpose should be upholding the Baxter family name and reputation. This silly tree-hugging phase is an embarrassment." "Yeah, that's just like you, always being so selfish," my younger sister Lila piped up, unable to meet my eyes. "Only caring about your dumb causes while the rest of us have to deal with the fallout." The harsh words stung, but I refused to back down. Not this time. I was tired of bowing to their twisted status quo. "Selfish?" I shot back, anger bubbling up inside me. "No, selfish is prioritizing money and image over actual human decency. Selfish is destroying the planet we all have to live on, all for greed." My father's hand slammed down on the table so hard the plates rattled. In that moment, I didn't see the successful businessman everyone admired. I saw an overgrown bully, fueled by arrogance and the deluded notion that his wealth made him infallible. "That's enough. I will not have you disrespecting this family with your radical nonsense any longer." His voice was dangerously low, but it couldn't mask the venom behind his words. "If you refuse to cease this environmental extremism immediately and start acting like a proper Baxter, then you can get out. You're no daughter of mine." An icy chill swept over me as the weight of his harsh words sank in. After years of them belittling my values and making me feel like an outcast in my own home, they were really doing it, disowning their own flesh and blood, all because I dared to think differently. But you know what? In that moment, I felt free. Free from their toxic expectations and narcissistic delusions of grandeur. "Fine," I said defiantly, pushing back my chair and rising to my feet. "If that's how you want it, I'm gone. Don't ever try to find me." Ignoring my mother's muffled sobs of mortification, I turned and marched out of that gaudy, overbearing mansion without a second glance. The disowned daughter, cut off from the only life I'd ever known. But instead of fear and sorrow, I felt hope. Hope for a life on my own terms, away from their twisted value system. A life where I could stay true to myself and chase my calling. As the door slammed behind me, I took a deep, resolute breath. This was just the beginning. I stood on my Aunt Nora's modest doorstep, a single duffel bag containing my meager belongings clutched tightly in my hand. My chest was still heaving from the bitter confrontation with my parents. After being so definitively disowned and exiled, I had nowhere else to go. The door swung open and there stood Nora, her face a mixture of sadness and fierce pride as she took in my stoic expression. "Oh, sweetie, come in," she said gently, pulling me into a warm embrace. In that moment, her arms felt like the only safe place left in the world. She ushered me inside to the cozy living room, such a stark contrast from the cold, museum-like decor of my childhood home. "I can't tell you how sorry I am you had to go through that," Nora said once we were seated on the well-worn sofa. Her eyes shone with a too familiar look of disdain as she spoke of her estranged sister Meredith. "But I want you to know, you now have a true home here. One without all those ridiculous, materialistic strings attached." Hearing those compassionate words after being berated and belittled for so long was like ripping off a weighted straitjacket. I could breathe again. "Thank you, Aunt Nora," I replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth for the first time in ages. "You have no idea how freeing it feels to get away from their toxic obsession with status and money." I paused, anger bubbling up again at the thought of the vile way my own parents had discarded me. Not that it should surprise me, I suppose. Seems pretty on brand for people willing to destroy the whole planet just to line their pockets with another buck. Nora's face contorted with a pained expression, and she squeezed my hand. "Sweetie, there's something you need to know about your parents." She then proceeded to shed light on the sordid truth behind my family's ill-gotten fortune. How my father's business empire was built on a deep-rooted web of environmental exploitation, corruption, and backroom dealing. how they had surreptitiously poisoned lands, bribed officials, and stopped at nothing to grow richer while leaving a trail of ecological devastation in their wake. A confounding mix of emotions swirled within me as I processed this: disgust and outrage, but also a sense of vindication. Of course, they had done something this vile and short-sighted. Money and power were the only things that mattered in their sick, twisted world. But amid the anger, a newfound determination took root. If these revelations were true, and I didn't doubt my aunt's words for a second, then my parents deserved to lose everything. To have their beloved empire crumble around them in karmic reckoning for the destruction they'd wrought. In that moment, I vowed to take them down and expose their lies, no matter what it took. They had shattered our family with their greed and disdain for my values. Now it was my turn to shatter their world and make them pay for their unforgivable sins. "Don't worry, Aunt Nora," I stated with steel in my voice, gripping her hand tight. "These truths won't stay buried forever. I'll make sure of that." She looked back at me with a sad smile, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Whether she knew it or not, I was no longer just her niece seeking shelter. I was a woman with explosive, the grudge, and a righteous path to justice, no matter how painful it would be. My rebirth had begun. My first day at Warren High was overwhelming, to say the least. After being homeschooled my whole life by a parade of aristocratic tutors, the idea of a normal public school setting was entirely foreign. But if I was going to take my parents down and reveal their wicked lies, I needed to blend into society away from their prying eyes. I clutched my beat-up backpack tightly as I waded through the bustling hallways, dodging past rambunctious cliques of teens. Their exuberant chatter and loud hormonal bursts of laughter were jarring compared to the eerie silence I was accustomed to. Part of me felt exposed and vulnerable, without the protective high walls of the mansion to hide behind. "Hey, you must be the new girl." A friendly voice suddenly rang out, cutting through the din. I turned to see a diminutive girl with vibrant purple hair and an abundant display of facial piercings smiling warmly at me. A fashion rebel if I'd ever seen one, the type that would have sent my prim mother into hysterics. Yeah, hi," I stammered, caught off guard. "I'm Alara." "Alara, cool," she replied enthusiastically, throwing her arm around my shoulders. The embrace was so foreign, yet oddly comforting. "I'm Jamie. Come on, let me show you around this drab place." And with that, Jamie launched into a whirlwind introduction as she escorted me through the winding halls, proudly pointing out every classroom, stairwell, and even certain illegal hangout spots, like she was giving a tour of Buckingham Palace. In that short span, I gleaned that under Jamie's eccentric exterior beat the heart of a true tech whiz and amateur hacker. She practically built the school's computer network from scratch herself. More importantly, I realized she was a devout environmentalist who was trying to make genuine change, unlike my parents' empty lip service while ravaging the planet. "You're like my spirit animal," I admitted with a laugh as she finished laying out her vision for a student-run environmental alliance club. Jamie beamed back at me, giving my shoulder a friendly nudge. "Then you'll have to join my little eco-warrior crew. We've got some pretty rad plans that I think you'd diva all over." And just like that, I'd stumbled into my first real human connection. Someone who got me, flaws and all, without arbitrary judgment or pretense. An ally who could actually aid me in disrupting my parents' nefarious dealing and forcing them to face the consequences they so richly deserved. Over the next few weeks, Jamie introduced me to the rest of her tight-knit group, including members of the newly formed Environmental Alliance. Each had their own unique skill and tragic story motivating them, like Ben, whose family farm was ruined by toxic chemical runoff, or Letitia, who lost her home to unnatural storm surges and coastal erosion. It was freeing to finally be around people who understood the severity of what was happening to our planet instead of burying their heads in the sand like wealthy ostriches. Their passion was infectious and gave me hope that our mission for redemption wasn't impossible. But my primary motivator was Lila's involvement. Once she'd finally mustered the courage to reach out and admit how poisonous our parents were, she started funneling me insider information on their under-the-table dealings. Every incriminating detail she passed along was like coal stoking the furnace of my anger. "I can't keep living this lie, doing their dirty work." She confessed through tears during one of our covert video calls. "You were right all along, Alara. They're utter monsters." Watching the despondent way my baby sister's spirit was crushed by our parents' manipulation and greed cemented my resolve. If taking them down was the only way to break this endless cycle of toxicity, then so be it. "Don't worry, sis," I said, squeezing her hand through the pixelated screen. "Pretty soon, the Baxters are going to get everything they deserve." "I have to show you something," Aunt Nora said gravely as she joined me in the living room one evening. The look of pained resolve on her face instantly put me on edge. "What's going on?" I asked, my mind automatically jumping to some new outrage from my monstrous parents. At this point, nothing could surprise me when it came to their depravity. Nora wordlessly handed me a bulging manila envelope, her hand trembling slightly. "I've been holding on to these for years, just in case the day came when the truth had to come out." My brow furrowed in confusion as I tore open the envelope and began rifling through the documents inside. Page after page of incriminating evidence, blueprints, financial statements, even photo and video proof. Of what exactly, I wasn't quite sure at first, but as the pieces started clicking into place, realization dawned with a sickening chill. "Oh my God!" I gasped, feeling like I'd been sucker punched in the gut. "Are you telling me?" "Yes," Nora replied with a grim nod. "Thomas and Meredith's entire empire is built on a foundation of illegal environmental destruction, exploitation, you name it. They've paid off countless regulators and policymakers to look the other way while decimating protected lands and watersheds for their own profits." The anger came swelling up like an unstoppable wave inside me as I continued poring over the documents. Photos of rainforest acres leveled by bulldozers to make room for a private resort. Video of factory pipes clandestinely pumping waste into pristine rivers. Even a money trail linking my father to an underground animal poaching ring. At that moment, I was sickened by the thought that even a single cent of my parents' blood money had lined my silver spoon upbringing. How many acres were pillaged, how many species rendered extinct, all to fund their lavish and meaningless lifestyle. "We have to expose them," I said, clutching the documents with shaking hands. There was no other option, no more moral gray area. These revelations essentially confirmed that my parents were criminal eco-terrorists, and they needed to be stopped by any means necessary. The world has to know the truth about what kind of monsters they really are. Nora sighed deeply and nodded. "I knew there'd come a day when you'd be ready to handle this truth, Alara. That's why I've been quietly gathering more proof over the years and funneling it to some trusted environmental groups. We're going to bring your parents' empire crumbling down around them." I felt the first pangs of guilt at the thought of betraying my own family so profoundly. But then I remembered Lila's tormented face and how our parents' greed had shattered her spirit. And I thought about the Environmental Alliance crew who had welcomed me with open arms. Jamie, Ben, Letitia, and the others who all deserved a better world than the pillaged wasteland my parents were leaving behind. That was when I realized this wasn't a betrayal, but justice. I was the only one willing to make the hard choice and stop this generational cycle of plundering and destruction. "Don't worry, I'm ready," I said fiercely, clenching my fist around the evidence. "The Baxters are going down, once and for all. No more innocents will suffer because of their eco-terrorism. Not on my watch." "We need to move carefully," Jamie cautioned as we pored over the trove of incriminating evidence against my parents. "If your dad gets even a whiff that we're onto his dirty dealings, who knows how far he'll go to bury this." I shuddered at the thought. After seeing the depths of environmental devastation he was capable of, all in pursuit of profit, it wasn't hard to imagine Thomas Baxter resorting to violent lengths to protect his empire. "She's right," Nora chimed in, wringing her hands anxiously. "These people have no boundaries when it comes to covering their tracks. We have to be meticulous." I could see the wariness in their eyes, the fear of crossing the wealthy and powerful Baxter family, but I refused to be deterred. This was about more than just revenge. It was about justice and making my parents atone for their corporate eco-terrorism. "Don't worry," I stated firmly, locking eyes with each of them. "They're not going to get away with these atrocities any longer, and they're sure as hell not going to intimidate me into silence." With grim determination, we got to work building an airtight case using the evidence Nora provided along with Jamie's technical wizardry to unearth even more damning paper trails. Every new revelation stoked the fires of my anger hotter. Shady real estate dealings to illegally develop fragile wetlands, under-the-table payments to senators to loosen environmental regulations. even a rare animal smuggling ring traced back to my father's inner circle. All the while, Lila continued funneling inside information to aid our efforts, including key financial data and witness testimony from disgruntled ex-employees. We were slowly but surely unraveling my parents' entire twisted web of lies and seeing the full scale of their crimes. "Mom and Dad are getting sloppy," Lila said during one of our covert video calls, a grim look etched on her face. "Ever since they strong-armed the mayor into greenlighting that new pipeline project, they've been getting bolder, more reckless in covering their tracks." I could see the toll this was taking on my little sister, being surrounded by our parents' toxicity, day in and day out. But she was committed to doing whatever it took to bring them down, her inner strength an inspiration to me. "We're closer than ever before," I assured her, gripping the edge of my laptop until my knuckles turned white. "Once we expose them, make sure the world sees them for the eco-terrorists they are. This will all be over soon." As momentum built, my eco-warrior crew and I moved from clandestine investigation to planning our big public offensive. We began organizing protests and awareness campaigns to rally support before detonating our bombshell revelation of the Baxter criminal empire. Jamie's hacking skills let us surreptitiously hijack electronic billboards and news tickers to amplify our message. "This is really happening," Ben said in an awed whisper as we watched video of our eco-avengers rallying cry plastered across Times Square's massive screens. For the first time, despite the very real threats, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. We were making waves that my parents could no longer ignore or bury. People were opening their eyes to the harsh realities of unchecked corporate greed at the expense of the environment, and soon they would know exactly who to hold accountable. But the higher our flames burned, the more pushback we received. First from restricted access and non-compliance with information requests, then outright intimidation from private security goons trying to scare us into submission. They clearly caught wind that I was the one leading this revolt against my family's empire. It all came to a terrifying head when several menacing-looking thugs showed up at Aunt Nora's doorstep, trying to force their way inside. "You need to stop whatever vendetta this is before you and your family get hurt," one of them growled, his fist hammering on the door. The Baxters don't take well to disobedience. I felt icy tendrils of fear snake their way through me at the implied threat. These weren't just hollow intimidation tactics. They were a harsh glimpse at how far my parents would go to safeguard their blood-soaked legacy. When I finally emerged and showed my face, the lead goon's eyes went wide with shock. "You? Thomas and Meredith's kid is behind this?" In that moment, I realized just how unforgivable my defiance was in their eyes, a betrayal that went far beyond disobedience. I was dismantling everything they'd spent decades so meticulously building. "That's right," I said, my voice dripping with venom as I stared the hulking man down. "And you can tell those eco-terrorist scumsuckers I'm just getting started." "Are you sure about this, Alara?" Jamie asked me one final time as we made the last few keystrokes to initiate our plan. "Because once we hit send, there's no turning back. Your parents are going to come firing back with both barrels." I nodded resolutely, steeling my nerves as the others in our crew exchanged uneasy looks. They knew as well as I did that this was the point of no return. I'm sure they've had this coming for a very long time. After months of hushed planning and covert information gathering, we were finally ready to unleash our bombshell on the world. A fully constructed website called Baxterpocalypse, containing every last scrap of evidence, testimony, and documentation of the Baxter family's rampant illegal environmental crimes and corruption. Taking a deep breath, I hit the enter key and watched as the nauseating sight of my parents' smirking faces took over our screen alongside the site's garish logo. It was almost impressive in its sheer scale. Bribery, habitat destruction, poaching, you name it, they had a hand in it, all to satisfy their gluttonous appetite for ever more wealth and power. And just like that, the digital wildfire began. Within mere hours, our exposé had spread across every news network and social media platform like a juggernaut, sparking outrage and heated debates. Suddenly, everyone wanted to weigh in on the highly public and scandalous downfall of the once idolized Baxter corporate empire. Photos and video splashed across the internet in rapid succession. Thomas being led out of Baxter headquarters in handcuffs, a visibly shell-shocked Meredith screaming at reporters, assets and properties being seized by authorities. "It's really over." Lila gasped as we watched rapturously from Nora's living room. Beneath her relief, I could see immense pain and guilt, the realization of how deep the rot in our family tree truly went. I pulled her into a fierce hug, holding her tight. No, sis, it's just the beginning. Fallout and chaos descended rapidly in the aftermath as the world finally saw the sickening reality behind the Baxters' sprawling empire. High-profile celebrities and politicians were caught in the crossfire, forced to publicly denounce their ties to my parents or join them in ruin. Overnight, they went from pillars of high society to the most reviled family in America. And at the smoldering center of it all, I stood tall and defiant, the remorseless daughter willing to do the unthinkable to make them atone for their sins against the environment and humanity. My phone began ringing incessantly with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. No doubt hired goons and lawyers trying to intimidate me into stopping, but I just let them ring, a small, vengeful smile creeping across my face. No matter what they threw at me, there was no stopping the truth from being widely exposed. The Baxters were disgraced, discredited, and finally being held accountable on a global stage. As the hours ticked by, I wondered if they were receiving my message loud and clear. No more innocents would suffer at the altar of their greed and exploitation. Not on my watch. I was the karmic reckoning they deserved, and it was only the beginning of the price they'd pay. Please state your name for the record. Lila swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she gripped the edges of the witness stand. In the packed courtroom, the weight of the moment seemed to smother us all. Lila Baxter? She said in a small but unwavering voice. I could see the internal struggle play out across her face as she stared forward, trying her best to avoid locking eyes with our glaring parents seated beside their utterly humiliated legal team. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. After helping funnel information for our exposé, Lila was the star witness against Mom and Dad, the inside source who could corroborate every last illegal activity in striking detail. You don't have to do this, sweetheart, Mom pleaded, a desperate whine in her voice as she leaned in to speak in hushed tones to her lawyer. Just refuse to answer their questions. Walk away right now and this can all be over. Despite her theatrical coaching, I could hear the veiled threat behind Mom's words. Our whole lives had been built on dominance and control, shunning any who dared defy their authoritarianism. Lila's defection was unforgivable in their eyes. My blood boiled watching Mom and Dad continue intimidating and manipulating their own daughter, even as their tightly constructed lies crumbled around them. After the world had seen the full extent of their corporate eco-terrorism, you'd think they'd finally be humbled or show remorse. But no. That arrogance ran too deeply. For a torturous moment, Lila's eyes darted over to their scowling faces, the ultimatum clear as day. Be a good little soldier and continue enabling their depravity, or finally break ranks and turn them over to face justice once and for all. When our eyes met from across the courtroom, I could see the agony etched in her expression. Despite all the pain Mom and Dad inflicted on both of us, there was still some childlike longing to win back their twisted version of love. I gave her a single, resolute nod, trying to convey everything in that simple motion. Be strong, sis. Do the right thing for yourself and for the world our parents have tried destroying their whole lives. Lila sucked in a deep breath, sat up a little straighter, and met the prosecutor's gaze. I'm ready, she stated firmly. Like pulling a loose thread, Lila's courageous decision to testify unraveled the insidious Baxter criminal empire entirely. For over a week, she commanded that stand with a sense of purpose I'd never seen from her before, delivering one bombshell revelation after another. I'll never forget the look on Mom and Dad's faces as the sordid details finally tumbled out. Their backroom deals with shady developers, the offshore shell companies, and secret slush funds used to bribe politicians, even their half-ownership stake in an underground rhino horn smuggling ring. They went stark white, all pretenses finally shattered. And through it all, as the mountains of damning evidence piled up, they stared daggers through Lila like a third daughter, not one of flesh and blood, but of pure turncoat vengeance. In the end, my dear sister's unwavering courage sent our wretched parents to be fitted for matching orange jumpsuits. With a stoic defiance, she obliterated their criminal empire and broke the cycle of fear and domination that had tightened around our family for decades. I've never been more proud of her. I still can't believe all this was Mom and Dad's, Lila remarked, her nose crinkling slightly as we took in the lavish decor of the Baxter estate. The sprawling family manor loomed over us like an opulent mausoleum, all of its grandeur and imported aesthetic feeling hollow and empty now. Stripped of its disgraced owner's ill-gotten fortune, the place had fallen into quiet disrepair under the receivership awaiting its inevitable liquidation sale. "Well, get ready to say goodbye to it," I replied firmly, "because the real victory is just beginning." In the weeks following our parents' landmark conviction and sentencing on a litany of environmental crimes and ethics violations, a tidal wave of reform had been unleashed. Federal and state prosecutors were scouring other bad actors and corporations empowered to dismantle the systemic foundations of greed and destruction propping up the Baxter Empire. It was like watching an entire industry of white-collar eco-terrorists being dragged into the harsh light and held accountable, every bribed official, every corner cut in the name of profit margins being exposed in real time. And at the heart of this new movement for environmental justice were my friends and former allies like Jamie and the Eco Avengers crew. Something beautiful was unfolding in the aftermath, rising from the ashes. Lands were being reclaimed and species re-protected. Enforcement of regulations had real teeth again, and a new generation of voices was emerging to speak truth to power and demand substantive change. As Lila and I wandered the grounds, it was cleansing to watch the symbols of our parents' greed and excess being dismantled, the stables emptied of their expensive stallions, landscaping crews beginning to tear out the imported exotic gardens. Like shedding plague-ridden garments, we were sloughing off the trappings of a dark family legacy that had poisoned us from birth. "Hey," Lila said, breaking me from my thoughts, "could you show me what we'll be helping to restore?" She nodded solemnly toward the sprawling forest acreage bordering the estate, part of the protected watershed my parents had schemed to develop for decades until my rebellion. I saw the remorse in her eyes, the sincerity behind her desire to make amends. "Of course." Hand in hand, we walked in silence through the towering oak trees and lush underbrush, stopping to admire the pristine woodland streams. For the first time, I was able to see this land for what it was, not some potential asset to be exploited, but a precious bastion of natural serenity so rare in our world. As the sunlight filtered through the canopy and birdsongs echoed all around us, peace enveloped my soul like a warm embrace. This was what I had been fighting so hard for, to protect sanctuaries like this from the ravages of greed and myopic overconsumption. And now, working alongside my sister and a new generation of dedicated environmental champions, I would be part of reclaiming and restoring the planet we had so mindlessly pillaged for far too long. Lila gave my hand a gentle squeeze, tears shimmering in her eyes. We'd endured so much trauma and heartbreak to get to this point, but those old wounds were finally scabbing over. "Thank you, Alara," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for never giving up on me, or the world." I smiled back at her, returning the squeeze as we took in the serenity surrounding us. "That's what family is for, sis. Now let's get to work repairing what's broken." We had won this battle, torn down the foundations of a toxic regime. But the real victory was just beginning, to rebuild something better from the wreckage, nurturing a brighter future in the process. And from this new beginning, hope could finally blossom again.